back now with G. Edward Griffin and Mark Calabria. Edward is the author of A Creature from Jekyll Island. If you haven't read this book, you should. Are you surprised, Edward, on how many people are reading this book now? It's got to, I mean, how long ago did you write this?
How long ago? Well,
Yeah.
it was published in 1994 was the first year.
Yeah.
And I'm totally surprised because it's a big, thick book, as you know. I thought it would be good for a doorstop. But amazingly, people really have taken an interest in it.
Yeah, it's got to be flying off the shelves because, I mean this sincerely. I probably have 100 copies of this myself because people come up to me all the time and say, you got to read this book. And I'm like, no, I haven't. And they're like, no, you got to read this book. I'm like, no, I have. And so I just take it. It's an amazing read that, you know, most people have never taken this journey down. I want to go to Ronald Reagan here for a second with you, Mark, and ask you, because I've always heard that Ronald Reagan, you know, after the 1970s and Jimmy Carter, which was kind of a mild version of what I think we're in now. Wow, that's scary, isn't it? He came in and he wanted to change some things, and the Fed, the story is that the Fed taught him a lesson. True?
There was a lot of pushback on the regulatory side, and that's the reason, if you remember, that Reagan reappointed Volcker one time, but he did not reappoint him the second time, and because at that point they were not getting along all that well, and there were pretty big differences in policy, and this is despite Reagan was very supportive of Volcker's efforts to bring inflation down. Most of the disagreements were really on the regulatory side. Reagan, in his Treasury Department, wanted to redo banking regulation in a way that Volcker did not agree with, as well as you may or may not know that the regional presidents have to be approved by the Federal Reserve here in Washington. And so there were a number of people that Reagan wanted to get appointed to regional Federal Reserve banks, and these were hard money people, these were people who were inflation fighters, and Volcker vetoed them. So he kept pushing Reagan's people out of the Federal Reserve system.
Okay. Edward, if people had to know one story of the Federal Reserve that would turn their hair the color of mine, what would it be?
That would be what I call the Mandrake mechanism. That's the process by which money is created out of nothing and put into the economy and withdrawn from the economy. If that doesn't cause your hair to turn white, I don't know what it is.
When they said
when
they said on Capitol Hill, when Bernanke said, we will not monetize our debt, I got on the air that night and said, he's already lying, but he will monetize.
That's all they know how to do.
Pardon me?
That's all they know how to do.
Right, and they monetize the debt, but they're still claiming, I don't know if they are now, but they were a few months back, that they are still claiming?
They're still saying we're not going to monetize.
Yeah, but they are. But they get away with saying we're not printing money, we're just digitizing it.
Yeah, I mean, you might remember there was that big interview with Bernanke, and he said there right out, well, you know, we're not creating new money. I mean, you know, they physically weren't printing money, but of course, if I took something, a bank account, and just here we are on the computer and put my money in your account, you'd feel like you have more money. So they were creating money electronically. So he very narrowly said, well, we're not printing more money. I mean, it was absolutely disingenuous. I mean, of course they were creating more money. If they were creating
Do
more
you believe that we are headed for
I think
real tough time?
I think we were headed for a real tough time, and I think we could potentially, you mentioned, you know, a bad version of Carter. We have the potential to be back in the 70s sort of situation. Remember, the word stagflation went away for a while, but we might be looking at a situation again where you're having high inflation and high unemployment.
How many people here would be like the manna from heaven if we only hit the 1970s? Would be like, oh wow, it's only as bad as Jimmy Carter years. That's fantastic. Edward, your opinion on can we get rid of the Fed? Is it possible?
It's technically possible because the Federal Reserve was created by an act of Congress and it can be abolished by an act of Congress. But what must happen before Congress has the backbone to do that? It has to be a complete change in Washington because by and large the people that are in office today are very much beholden to this creature, and they're not going to do it. So we have a political agenda here. If
you have people who, like you say, can control through monetary policy, you'll never get those people. You'll never make that change because they would control too much of the money. I mean, they could make the pain enormous. Am I wrong on that?
No, you're quite right. In fact, we have the precedent for that during the fight between President Jackson and the Second Bank of the United States. The head of the central bank, which was that version of the Federal Reserve today, his name was Nicholas Biddle. And he fought back exactly that way. When Jackson tried to generate support for getting rid of the second bank, he said, "I will pull the country down." He said, "The nation will fall, the people will fall, but the bank will not fall." That was his exact quote. And he practically succeeded in doing that. So you can be sure, in a contest of this kind, where we're challenging the Federal Reserve power, there's no question in my mind that they will pull out all the stops and try and ruin the economy and then blame it on the fact that we were challenging the Federal Reserve.
Let me ask this one question from you, Mark, and then we have to take a break, and that is, how connected are the central banks? How connected? I mean, how much... When I saw them say, you know what, we're going to devalue everybody's money here for a while to help Japan out, I thought, wait, hold it. Shouldn't you talk to maybe, I don't know, the people of the world? And they're just moving together as one, central bank to central bank.
There really is a bankers club that's been there since the beginning. For instance, I mean, even among mainstream economists, it's generally recognized that the Federal Reserve of New York's efforts to support British pound and support the Bank of England in the 1920s helped cause the stock market bubble here. And you see that it's been continued ever since. I mean, we lent tons of money during the crisis to other central banks. And this is the problem, is that they talk to each other. You know, so their constituency is protecting each other and making each other look good, not essentially listen to what the American public wants. So I do think there's a real problem that they're not looking out for our interests as much as they're looking out for the interests of each other.
Back in just a second.